day, my friends. It's your old pal Jordan the Lion. How are you all doing today? I hope you said well. Today I'm coming to you from Wilmington, North Carolina, and we are going to do the filming locations of the David Lynch classic Blue Velvet. Don't look at me! Well, here we have our first location of the movie, Jeffrey's house. We see Jeffrey's dad working in the back, and he's having some trouble with the hose. It's tangled up, so he starts fighting with it, and next thing we know, he looks like he's having a heart attack or a stroke and falls down, and the water starts spraying everywhere, and the dog starts going crazy and everything, and his dad ends up in the hospital. So we end up seeing Jeffrey here later on in the movie working in the same spot in the back as his dad. But then we see it again later in the movie, almost towards the end, when he's getting chased. He has Sandy in the car, and he thinks that it is, he thinks it's Frank following him, and then Sandy realizes that it's actually Mike, her boyfriend. So when they come pulling up right here where these cars are, Jeffrey pulls up here where the red car is, and Mike pulls up there, and they start getting ready to fight. Mike comes out and starts yelling at him through the window, and then when they get out, they notice that Dorothy is standing over here naked. And Mike says, "Who's that, your mother?" Then all of a sudden they end the fight and go over and start helping Dorothy because she's beaten, bruised, and been left on his front lawn. It actually looks pretty similar to the movie, except it doesn't have the white fence out front anymore, but looks pretty dang close. And one thing I noticed about this movie that David Lynch was doing a lot of, whenever he would do an establishing shot of anywhere in the movie like this, he would always have some sort of car or vehicle or truck come right through, driving right through the middle of the shot. And he does it just about every single time he establishes a place. We found the old cobblestone roads of Wilmington here on our way. You're helping about as much as you can right now, aren't you? Well, here we have Sandy's house, and also her father, Detective Williams. We see Jeffrey bring her home here a number of times and pick her up here. And one of the main ones we see is when Jeffrey brings the, well, first time we see it is when he comes over here to talk to, he had talked to Detective Williams about the ear that he found in the field at the precinct. But then he came over here to ask if there was any news, and that's when the detective says, "There is, but I can't tell you, and I don't want you to worry about it, and don't even think about it anymore." So eventually, of course, Jeffrey can't let that go, and he ends up continuing on with this case, finding out more, and then he goes on that surveillance where he's taking all the photos at Frank's warehouse, and he brings the photos here and shares them with Detective Williams. And then they notice that one of the people in the photos is one of the detectives that he works with. They call him the Yellow Man. So one of the times that he comes back after that to pick up Sandy, the Yellow Man is actually here at the house. So there's probably 5 or 6 different scenes that take place at this house. One of the last, if not the last one, being after they have found Dorothy in front of Jeffrey's house in need. They bring her here, and they're looking for Detective Williams to get help, and Sandy's mom comes out and starts helping, and they call an ambulance and everything, and that's when Dorothy starts screaming, "No police, no police," and she starts asking Jeffrey if he loves her right in front of Sandy. So then that makes Sandy upset, because Sandy had just told Jeffrey a little bit ago earlier that night that she loved him. So this was Sandy's house. So right here we have New Hanover high school here in Wilmington, but it actually acts as Central High School, and this is where Jeffrey always ends up coming to pick up Sandy. Usually it's right after school, obviously, because she's still in school, but there's one time that he pulls up here and she's standing here, and across the street you can see her boyfriend Mike and the football team working out. Now they have a fence there, but where the tennis court is right over there, they're all actually out there doing calisthenics, and she comes over and yells for, or Mike yells for Sandy, and then sees her about to get in Jeffrey's car and gets discouraged and walks away. She wants to go talk to him, and she says, yeah, but I'll have to do it later. And they end up getting in the car and taking off from here. Next location is just up here to the left. So that little market right there was Belmonts Hardware. That was his family's hardware store that Jeffrey comes back to work after his father's ended up in the hospital. Doesn't look exactly the same, but you can recognize that house was still there and the structure's pretty similar. See a couple of scenes here. One of the first ones being, he mentions that he's getting to set his own hours, and he's in there and he's asking, his father has a blind employee that knows everything about the store, and Jeffrey's asking him where he can find the canister for the bug spray and the overalls. He's like testing him, and of course the guy knows where everything is, but the reason he's doing it is because he's gonna go to Dorothy's apartment and pretend to be the bug guy. So we see that in there. See a couple of scenes. We see the scene where the guy's in there buying the axe and everything. So he's running that store. And you notice throughout the movie, a couple of times people ask him for his full name, and he doesn't want to give his last name. That's why, because his family owns the hardware store. Here's that famous fountain. When Jeffrey finds out from Sandy where Dorothy Vallon lives, it's right here. They call it the Deep River Apartments. It's actually called the Carolina. So she tells him that Dorothy lives on the 7th floor. He wants to go and snoop around. So that's why he's got the overalls and the spray can, like he's a bug inspector. First time we see it, the elevator is broken, so he has to take the stairs. Actually, through the whole movie, everyone has to take the stairs up to the 7th floor. And while he's up there, he starts to notice something is a little fishy. His plan is basically to go up there and have Sandy go knock on the doors of Jehovah's Witness, and so he can look around and loosen a window so he can come in later and snoop around. She's the only connection that there is to this ear that's been found out in the field. So that's what he's trying to find out. He just knows she's somehow connected to it, and so he is up there while she's in the apartment. He finds her spare key, and his plan is to go back at night while she's performing and snoop around. So that's what he does. He ends up coming back to this apartment building while she's performing over at the Slow Club, and then goes up there to the apartment, and while he's looking around, he has to go to the bathroom. He has to pee because he's been drinking the Heineken, and he misses the signal, the horn honking from Sandy to let her know, or to let him know that Dorothy's coming home. And Dorothy comes in, he hides in her closet and sees her undress and everything, and then she hears a noise and grabs a knife and goes in there and finds him, and then has him come out, wants to know his name and everything, and he won't tell her. So then she tells him to strip all of his clothes off, and she basically has adopted the personality of Frank, who we first see in a scene here, because she's dominating Jeffrey, telling him to take his clothes off, and she's basically going to molest him. And then all of a sudden Frank starts banging at the door, Dennis Hopper. So Jeffrey has to hide in the closet while Dennis Hopper comes in, and you find out that his whole thing is that you kind of find out he has kidnapped her son and her husband, cut her husband's ear off, and that's why it was out in the field, and he's using them being held hostage to come and molest her and beat her every night use her as basically his slave. So he always calls her mommy, and she always has to put on the blue velvet robe, and that's what calms him when he is getting crazy or freaking out or whatever. He grabs part of the robe and will put it in his mouth while simultaneously yelling at her or telling her, "Don't look at me!" And he'd punch her in the face or smack her or something. And you kind of notice that that's something that she has developed over time that she likes. So when Frank finally gets done doing his whole thing, which that character that Dennis Hopper created for Frank is amazing. I mean, that was all him, from the gas mask thing to the way he talked to her, the names he called her and everything. That was all him. And when he leaves, Jeffrey comes out, and Jeffrey won't beat her and won't do any of the things that Frank did. So he starts to realize this lady needs help. So there's quite a few scenes here, especially towards the end, right, well, basically halfway through the movie, he starts an affair with her, Jeffrey does, and one of the times that he's leaving the apartment, Frank and his cronies are coming in, and that's when they take Jeffrey out for the joyride and beat him up and leave him stranded out there. But then also at the end of the movie, Jeffrey comes back to her apartment, and that's when he finds her husband Don with the missing ear is already dead in the apartment. The yellow man is dead in the apartment, and Jeffrey calls Sandy's dad, Detective Williams, to come and help save him, knowing that Frank has a police radio himself. And so Frank, as Jeffrey's trying to come down the stairs, which I'll show you, you can actually see him, they have him accessible. As he's trying to go down the stairs, he sees Frank coming up, so he hides in the closet, and as Frank's getting ready to kill him, he opens the door and Jeffrey shoots him in the head and kills Frank. Let's go take a look at those famous stairwell. Actually, if you look through this little gate hole, you can see that's the door straight ahead that Jeffrey originally the first time comes out of to take the stairs up. And then there are the stairs. The apartment was 710. So I've been right up there. For me, I think this is one of my favorite locations of the movie. This is the one I wanted to see probably the most. And like I said in the movie, it's called the Deep River Apartments. They call it the Carolina here. All right, let's head off to our next location. Really cool seeing Dorothy's apartment. She's about the only character in the movie you really feel sorry for, I think. And here before us is Arlene's. It's now called Savares, but looks pretty much exactly the same as it did in the movie. We see, I don't know, 3 or 4 different scenes here where they always come to eat. Whenever Jeffrey and Sandy want to have a conversation or anything, they always end up coming over to Arlene's, and that's where he always tells her what's happened or what he's found out since. That's where he recounts the whole story of following Frank over to the warehouse and finding out about him. So they have a couple of scenes in there. Nice to see it hasn't changed or been bulldozed or anything. Really, the only filming location from this movie that's gone is the police station. You're still doing a good job, Jaw. Thank you. So right here, Winnie's Tavern in the movie is actually the Slow Club. That is where Dorothy works. Jeffrey tells Sandy that he wants to go see her sing and find out where she works, and Sandy says, well, I already know. She works, well, she sings at the Slow Club. So they come here and they see her performing, of course, Blue Velvet. They're having a Heineken in there, and that's when Jeffrey tells her that he loves Heineken, which eventually caused a problem because when he breaks into Dorothy's apartment right after they leave here, when Sandy does the 3 honks to let him know that Dorothy's coming home, he's using the bathroom because of the Heineken, and he doesn't hear the honks because of the flush. But we see this later when he comes here to see her perform, because he's kind of falling for her, or at least has a weird fascination with her, and sees Frank inside. Frank is played by the one and only Dennis Hopper, one of the greatest parts he ever played. Frank is in there with his cronies, and we see Jeffrey leave the club, and he comes out, gets in his car, and his car is parked right here. So he waits for Frank and his cronies to get in their car right over there, and as Frank and his friends drive off that way, then we see Jeffrey's car right here also go pulling after and following him right down that road. And of course, the first time we see it, they're showing the name of the club going slowly across here where it says The Slow Club. So here we have Frank Booth's warehouse. We see Jeffrey follow him in the evening from the Slow Club into here, and then he eventually comes back for a stakeout, and he's got his like a shoebox on the console up on the dashboard, and it's got a hidden camera in it. So he's slowly snapping pictures of everything that's going on, so the next time he comes back here, he sees a car come pulling into the driveway in here, and he sees a man he starts calling the Yellow Man, because he's got that yellow suit. There used to be like a building right here, like a house, and you see the Yellow Man and Frank go walking right out here. You can see the steps right there, different style steps now than what were in the movie, and then they continue on. You see them actually right there on that corner, and they are going to the doorway on the left over here, which is the entrance to Frank's apartment. We had seen Jeffrey sneak in there and look at the mailbox and see it. And then he's recounting this story to Sandy and says, then he saw, instead of when he first went in, it was Frank and the man he calls the Yellow Man. But when they came out, it was a man with a well-dressed suit and the Yellow Man, not Frank. But you piece it together later that that is Frank, and you see that man hail a car over here, and they get in the car, and you can see that garage door and everything over there in the shot, and they drive away. And that's part of the story where Jeffrey's telling Sandy that he heard them say that they went off and saw at the top of another building a murder. So here's the church that Sandy and Jeffrey pull up in the car to talk about what Jeffrey has found out. And that's when he starts it out with, the world's a sad place. Tells her that Dorothy has a husband who has been kidnapped along with their son and is being held hostage so that Frank can get Dorothy to do things for him. And that's when he's saying that he doesn't understand why the world lets people like Frank exist, and doesn't know what he's gonna do, and doesn't know what to do with the information he has. After Frank shows up at Dorothy's apartment and finds Jeffrey there, he and his cronies take him out for the joyride. And when they're out riding around, he says, "Let's go to Ben's place." Actually, Ben, the actor Dean Stockwell that played Ben, just passed away. But we're gonna go over to where Ben's place was. So the Barbary Coast right here is actually Ben's place, and they park their car right there, come knock on the door. This is actually the oldest bar in Wilmington, and I went by here yesterday when they were open. When you open their front door, it's a big Grateful Dead theme. But one of the cool things I noticed about this was that when they're open, they have the neon lit up, and it says, "This is it," right there. In the movie, you actually see that right here. But yes, this is the front door to Ben's, and Ben's is actually like a house, and when you go in, it's a bunch of people just lounging around and hanging around, like middle-aged people. And you find out that's when you kind of see that Frank's whole thing is power. He just likes to have control of people, so he's showing Ben how he can get Jeffrey to do anything he wants. And he's also in there, that's when they have that whole scene of Ben performing In Dreams by Roy Orbison, and Frank freaks out. But he also, you find out that in here, that's where Dorothy's son is being held. He's being watched by the ladies inside here, because while they're in here, Frank says, well, I'm not going to say what he calls her, but he calls her by a part of her body and says, let her see her kid. Like one scene, but it's about a 10-minute scene that reveals a lot about the movie. And then once Dean Stockwell is performing that song, he gets about halfway through and you see Frank gets this insane look on his face like he's about to lose it. And so they turn the song off and Frank says, we gotta go. And they take off. Yep. Ben's place. So here is the party house. When Jeffrey has went over to Detective Williams' house, told him everything, but he didn't tell him that Sandy was involved in anything with him. On his way out, he asks if she's available to go out, which is crazy because she has a boyfriend. Her boyfriend is Mike, the football player, but she's spending so much time with Jeffrey, helping Jeffrey and everything, she's starting to fall for him. So they come to the party at this house, and inside, that's when they have their slow dance, and she confesses her love for him and him the same for her. So it's kind of a predicament because he's been sleeping with Dorothy and kind of seems like he's falling for her, but he's also falling for Sandy at the same time. So when they're leaving here, they get in their car, they get in Jeffrey's car, and they think that Frank is now following them from the party, chasing them. But it turns out, once they get back to Jeffrey's house, it wasn't. It was actually Mike. It was the boyfriend. And pretty much right across the street from the party house is one of the night scenes when they're walking. The first time Jeffrey and Sandy, they come past this house right here without all the nice orange trees and everything. And that's the house that he looks at and says, I used to know a kid that lived in this house. He had the biggest tongue in history. Well, my friends, I hope you enjoyed this vlog. I love this movie. I think it's, you know, it's one of those great classic David Lynch movies. I know David Lynch isn't for everyone, but I think this is one of his best ones. If you've never seen Blue Velvet, go see it. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time. Have a great night and goodbye.